Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Barron. I'm a longtime education reporter and host of The Score, a podcast about academic integrity and cheating. We explore the landscape of cheating in school and delve into the key issues at play in this multifaceted issue challenging academia today. In each episode, we speak with faculty, scholars, or students and ask them to provide insights into what's happening in college and university classrooms and why. How big a problem is it? Who cheats? As well as what policies, regulations, prevention efforts, and changes in teaching and assessment show promise in curbing cheating. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcast The Score, that's one word, or stop by our website to download show notes and see our lineup of guests and release dates. Again, that's podcastthescore.com. On this episode of The Score, we look at cheating from a different angle than we have before. Our guest is Dave Tomar. From 2001 to 2010, Dave worked as the ultimate ghostwriter. He was a contract cheater. He wrote thousands of college essays, reports, and even master's degree theses. After a decade of putting words into other people's work, Dave Tomar put the cheating life behind him. He's since written 2 books about his experiences: The Shadow Scholar, How I Made a Living Helping College Kids Cheat, and The Complete Guide to Contract Cheating in Higher Education. Dave Tomar, welcome to The Score.
Thank you for having me.
So in this episode, I want to explore with you the business of contract cheating. What's it like on the inside? But I'm thinking before we get to that, perhaps I should have a quick disclaimer that this is not a how-to conversation, so please don't do this at home or with your friends at school. Now, the first question, you've written that there's one question you are frequently asked, so let's begin with that one. How did you get into this line of work?
Well, I was a student at Rutgers University and an aspiring writer, a communications major, and I did not find that the state school with the 400-person lectures was necessarily cultivating my desire to write. As much as I looked for opportunities to do it in classes, and as much as I worked very hard to submit my probably poorly written journal articles, to publications, I was met with a lot of closing doors. Meanwhile, my fellow students were most interested in the fact that I was an aspiring writer. To them, it was an extremely valuable skill set. And it happened quite organically that my classmates started to ask me, well, if you're looking for writing work, maybe you'll be interested in writing my sociology paper. Maybe for a few dollars, you'd want to write my political science paper. And, from my view, this was my first paid gig as a writer. So.
So you didn't have any second thoughts. You're just like, hey, money. I need money.
Oh, I mean, my second thought was survival. So, I was the sort of cliche poor college student who, ate unmicrowave popcorn for dinner out of desperation. So, it was a no-brainer that somebody was going to actually pay me for my given skill set. And granted, by that time in my life, I'd had far worse jobs. So,
how and why did you go from there to the giant essay mill companies? You're doing this on campus with friends, and then you made a jump. What happened?
Well, on campus, my services, proliferated pretty quickly by word of mouth. As you may or may not know, Rutgers University has a very active Greek life. And if you're looking for a target audience, the fraternities were a really great starting point because, word just moved like wildfire, through those places. And so I started to receive calls from strangers. I hear that this is something you do. One day I was receiving one of those calls before a class, and a girl walked up to me and said, I hear this is something that you do, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but my boyfriend works for a company online, and this was 2001, and so This was a really fledgling industry of bespoke essay writing. So it was the first I learned about it, that there were others like me with writing abilities and some ethical flexibility when it came to the honor system.
What made it attractive to you to go from your freelancing around campus to contracting with an essay mill?
Well, I saw quickly that this type of service was popular with my classmates, but I had no idea how large the demand was. And when you start working for these companies, suddenly it's not simply that you're getting paid to write, it's that you have more writing work than you can handle, which was a unique and exciting position for me to be in, honestly.
You were doing this and you were still a student?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Most college students really don't love the essay reporting part of their classes.
Well, that's the funny part for me. That was the only part of my education that was at all enriching. Was the opportunity to write, and because I found that that opportunity was pretty limited in any sort of academic way at Rutgers, I was this was a great outlet for me. Just to sharpen my tools and to do. This sounds ironic, but to do what I came to college to do.
What did you have to do to get hired? Did you have to pass any writing test, say?
A very simple writing test, not as simple as the writing tests you might take at Rutgers, but still pretty basic. No, it is easily the simplest hiring path to a writing job that you can possibly imagine. That they will, most companies give you a short writing prompt and say, put together your 300 words on this to show you can do it. And from there, that you'll get the job. You're hired as an independent contractor, so for them the risk is pretty low. And not only that, if you don't do a good job, either you will quit because it is miserable, or they will fire you for missing deadlines. So for them, the risk is not that great. I always figure with a job like this, as you mentioned, most people don't prefer the essay writing part. So if you're applying for a job to write essays for a living, chances are you can do it. Otherwise, it would be who would apply for such a nightmare?
That's true. What was the difference in payment between when you were freelancing and when you were a contractor?
Should I say this during a podcast? Well, nobody gave me marijuana with my money when I started working for the online company.
Okay, so you took in kind payment. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
there were it was a bit of a barter system as well on the college campuses. But no, the real difference was that while I was charging between $10 and $20 a page, both independently and while working for online companies, the online companies were charging twice that. I would get half of it, but that was sort of the model, for profitability. As an independent contractor, I would get half, they would get half. So I was essentially learning that I could have been charging twice as much on campus. However, it was worth splitting the proceeds because the work was so plentiful.
Mhm. So you could live on this. This got you out of that desperation mode.
It was a start. I hadn't figured out how to live on it yet. That would only come after college. It is a skill that you do refine, and that the speed grows, and you start to take on more essay writing companies. At my peak, I maybe had 3 or 4 outlets, so that I could always be taking in the most optimal work, the best paying gigs. So it took me just about 2 years past graduation to go full time.
About what did you earn a year?
I probably started when I went full time earning just a little over $30,000, which, so was a raise for my legitimate job. And by the end, and let's bear in mind inflation now applies, but this was 2010. I think I earned about 66,000 in my peak year, and that is an amount of money that, while it doesn't sound extraordinary, is number one, for a freelance writer, was above average, and number two, took just an absolutely inhuman amount of grinding and hustling to achieve.
Do you have any sense of how many independent contractors like yourself there are working for these companies?
Certainly thousands. Every company that I've worked for, has a different size pool. Some of them, you could tell it was a couple dozen, but others were sort of these broad online syndicates where, when you get a sense of the surface level of this industry, there are big faces looking out to customers, but there may be 20 of them affiliated with the same writing pool. And so, the back door that I worked in for one company was a name that you would never see in public, but they pulled in assignments from, a couple dozen different outlets that are pretty well known. And so that was a pool of hundreds. And now when you get to the real essay mills, which are some of the lower grade ones that might be operating overseas with even fewer rules, they could be working with stables of thousands.
Once you're on that, how were the assignments made? Did the companies contact you? Did you say, "Hey, I'm open. What do you have?"
So the smaller companies would actually reach out to you with individual assignments. They'd say, "You interested in this one? You interested in this one?" Um, which is a bit of a clunky model, but I certainly have worked that way. The best companies that I have worked for use an automated system. You go onto a page like cheat.com and you order your assignment. And it automatically shows up on a board that I and hundreds of other writers have access to. And as soon as it shows up, it tells me when it's due, what it's about, what the college level, graduate level is, and how much I'm going to get paid to do it. And you click the right button, and it goes into your box, and you are responsible for it. And from there, have it done by the deadline. You can communicate with the customer only using the channels provided on the writer board website so that there's not a risk of you poaching customers. It was a pretty automated process for the better companies.
You could pick the one that you wanted then?
Correct.
Okay. What did you gravitate toward any particular subjects?
I'm a history and English guy. I would gravitate toward history. Political science was always fun for me, So that kind of material, current events stuff, was always my favorite. In the middle of the summer, when work got low and you didn't really have a choice, I would take on nightmarish things about financial reporting and tax policy and some really horrible stuff, you name it. But if I had my choice, I would take some of the let's call them the softer humanities.
Would you read? So you take this project on, then do you reach out to the student through that channel, or does the student get your information and reach out to you to maybe have a chat online about what they're looking for?
Well, I would say that in probably 75 to 80% of the cases there was zero conversation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, because you get the assignment, and unless they felt there was any more specific instruction than what they provided you originally, or unless you as the writer felt that you hadn't received enough information to complete the work, it was really a fairly automated service. At least, that's how I approached it. Frankly, I didn't get into that line of work to do customer service, and I was a bit of a hermit writing away in my cave at the time. So it was very much like, if I can avoid conversing with other humans, I certainly will. And so I was never really affirmative about reaching out to anybody. If you had enough information, you write the assignment and complete it. There were plenty of exchanges because revisions would be needed. Customers would reach out and say, "I have special instructions," or "I just want you to know how desperate I am," those sorts of things. And so, I did have those conversations plenty, but I certainly didn't initiate them, and they were not always necessary, and most of the time were not necessary.
What were some of the things that students would write to you when they did have contact with you? Was there sort of a typical kind of letter?
Some of them would be, really, "Here's my assignment," and they paste the information in. But, you also got to sort of know the prototypical student. And fortunately, I've never deleted anything in my Gmail.
Okay, so pick one out then.
Little examples here. This is a 12-pager on Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation. I desperately need this completed on the earliest date you can do. My grade is borderline, so this needs to be at least a B grade paper. Can you help me? That's pretty standard, you know. Here's another one. This was a 6-page college paper on World War II. Uh, I need it by tomorrow morning. I'm desperate for good help. There must be no plagiarism. Everything has to be cited. There are no extensions given in this course. You can see that, this is a typical sort of, I want you to know I'm under pressure sort of situation. Here's one. Here's the last one I'll read to you here because this was for a 60 to 90 page master's thesis on the cultural aspects of the life of Indian immigrants,
Oh my gosh.
specific to those living in the UK. And I'll just let you know that the person who was assigned to write this was an Indian expatriate living in England. So you would think more qualified to write this than me, a white guy living in America. But here he says, I have written so far the introduction and the first chapter, but I stuck with the rest. I need someone of Indian origin living in UK to finish my diploma. I have quite a lot of material in PDF, which I can scan or can send good websites. I am desperate and need your help. I work full time and don't have time to write it, waiting for your reply. And now this one's really important, and I have to pull attention to the fact that when I read sort of the typos and the grammatical errors in there, I don't do so to mock this student. I do so to point out that this is a master's level student, and this is how their written communication appears. So you can't help but look at that email and say this person really lacks the academic qualifications to write the assignment that they're outsourcing. And so that's an important point, that I like to make a lot, which is that this desperation, this is not to dismiss the ethical implications of this conversation, but from a practical standpoint, this guy could not write this assignment, and that's just a fact.
And this assignment was to determine whether this person received a master's degree or not.
Correct. So, they got to that level in their education without any intervention in their ability to write. They may have understood the subject matter
Well,
really
as far
well.
as you
I'll be
know,
honest.
right?
It's been a long time since I wrote that assignment, so I'll be honest, I can't remember what the information they provided looked like, but, you can see just from a couple of samples of their sentence structure that this would have been a really tough thing for a professor to have to read.
What kind of information is included when you accept a specific assignment? Does that come with different readings and sources that you would need to go to?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes you would get, attachments on your writer's board where your assignment comes in. You would receive attachments with scanned PDFs. I've had customers mail really gorgeous hardbound books to my house. And when I was in college, I couldn't afford the books, so this is nice for me to receive them in the mail now, But I, yeah, you would receive sources from customers. But I should also point out that some customers would say this is a 60-page paper, on police work and law enforcement, and those are your instructions.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's
And you
not,
know what? If that's what I got, that's what I would do because that's what you ordered.
wow. So I guess, yeah, it's hard for them to complain when they're not giving you much information. I mean, are there complaints?
Yes, hard
There
to
are.
complain, but not uncommon. Yes. So the rule is this, and this is an important thing to note about these paper writing companies as well. Revisions are important. Repeat business is important. Satisfied customers are important. So if you fail as the writer to meet the instructions set for you, it is your responsibility to address customer complaints and provide the revision. On the other hand, if you respond to the customer's assignment and then they only realize after receiving it that they didn't, ask for exactly what they needed, that is not a revision. That is another charge. There was a pretty fair line about how we provided revisions and what might require additional charges.
Was there any option for a student who's a repeat customer to select you? Say, this person did my previous paper and it was great. Can I get that person again?
100%. It was part of the assignment submission form for a customer was if you wanted to request a specific writer. And so, I worked with students through, a full course, a full semester, 3 years of a program, you name it. If you're working with a student on a thesis or a dissertation, I know professors always say, well, how is that even possible? We're constantly meeting and they have to defend this and there's feedback and well, it's good paying money because you are basically, the student's just a liaison between you and the professor at that point. Professor gives some feedback, the student brings it to you, and I say, okay, well, I got to work on my thesis a little. Um, and that was kind of how that process worked. So repeat business was important. Writer requests were very common. And that's not only that, but once you start buying assignments and submitting them in somebody's voice, a savvier student knows not to raise red flags. So sticking with the same writer is usually a good idea.
Well, it is interesting, though, when you talk about voice, that some things clearly the student has to write for him or herself. And that is going to be a different level of quality, grammar, and voice.
Yeah, well, it helps for students that go to schools like the one that I did because
Mm.
Rutgers University was so large and in so many contexts so impersonal that it was, maybe nobody's looking. you know and I witnessed it enough with my customers at Rutgers that it was a very very easy thing to get away with when you're dealing with graders and TAs and the professors teaching the course, but you never have once interacted with this person. It's a very commonplace thing in a larger school. Now I'm not saying that is the scenario always, but just as an example of how easy that might actually be to get away with.
Mm. Well, this is a huge business, and I have to say I was flabbergasted at how many of these companies exist. You list in one of the books, I think the complete guide to contract cheating at the end, you have a list of about 470 cheating companies. And you make a note that this is just a partial list. And they operate
Oh
like
yeah.
any other business. I looked up one company on the list at random, and it made no attempt to obscure what it's selling. So the home page boasts this is a quote: top academic writers at your service 24/7. Each of our essay writers passes 3 rounds of tests to offer you original and quality paper, even within 4 or 8 hours. Now, there is sort of a quick grammatical problem here. They left out the S on papers. But anyway,
Pretty commonplace.
yeah. And I thought, how does this company, how do these companies avoid detection when they're just so obvious and blatant with their uh, advertising?
Well, first of all, you can't avoid detection because that's poor marketing. Well, it's really visibility is actually extremely important. There's a couple of things to note here. Number one, detection is not an issue. Obviously, legal liability would be an issue. And if the appendix of my book includes a disclaimer from one of the companies I worked with, and it was your responsibility as a writer to use this as the title page every time you submitted a new assignment to a customer, a completed assignment to a customer. And so those legal disclaimers are designed to sort of protect you, against whatever language might exist. And there are some states that have language on the books, but it's pretty easy to parse. That's number one. And number two, and most importantly, this is the thing I do my best to impress upon educators at every single turn. It is very, very common and understandable to think of this as this sort of black market for papers. Sure, it's a shady business, but it's not like drug dealing where these people are sort of lurking in the shadows. It is an out in the open business. It operates like an out in the open business. It is part of the online service industry. And the more I talk to people who are really concerned with academic integrity, the more I hear people bringing up companies like Chegg. And Chegg is one that so many people are concerned about because they provide this service underneath a really like large air of academic legitimacy. And truth be told, do serve a lot of legitimate academic purposes. So to, a company like that is sort of just blurring the line, or it's a line that only educators see. If you're in the business of academic services, what you see is a cottage industry and a need created by many things that are wrong in higher education. That's not a moral judgment, it's just a practical business assessment. These are real companies and they operate like real companies. And if we think of them as these shady, black market drug dealing type of companies, then we sort of undermine their danger. I paid taxes when I did this job. They paid taxes. It was very normalized workaday sort of life with customer service and everything else. And that while there are certainly shady companies out there, I think that's probably true of every industry. Those are not the ones that are going to survive in the long run. The companies that I worked for 20 years ago are still there, and there is a reason.
Well, it's interesting how you say that they operate just like any other legitimate business, because in the appendix to your second book, there's a memo to writers from management of an actual company, one of these essay mill companies. And it starts off with, "Hello, writers. We hope you're all doing well during this extremely busy time. We cannot believe how fast 2009 went by. It felt like just yesterday that we were starting the year. We thank you all for your hard work and dedication." And in a way, it's a kind of comically normal message. It could have come from any management at any company.
Well, I think that's kind of part of the point, with these companies. Internally, we were just people who provided a writing service, and arguably, if you just called it academic ghostwriting, well, go up on a place like Upwork and find me people that are doing that with an air of legitimacy, and you'll see why it was so easy to sort of blur that line from within. But the other part about it was they treated their writers pretty well. Uh, and that's another thing that I know it sounds like these are all sort of glowing endorsements for paper writing companies, and they are. They're not. They're not. And like you said, this is not a how-to manual on doing this. It's just to point out that one of the reasons that they are so dangerous is because there is a friendly sort of nature to the exchanges within, and there is this sort of air of legitimacy within, and they operate like normal companies. And so it's just really important to not look at them as sort of these non-threatening shady companies that can be easily identified as a criminal contingent,
Well, yeah, because in that same memo on later on, it was a fairly lengthy memo. They
Hmm.
announced a contest,
Hmm.
and I can't remember what the winner would get, but it was based on how many papers you wrote.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so I wonder, was there pressure to do a lot of writing to just take on as much as you possibly could?
Not from them, no. We were independent contractors, and there was rarely that. I mean, actually, from some of the companies I worked for, where they would send you individual assignments, they would hammer you pretty hard with opportunity for work during finals and midterms, when heavy season, as we called it. That memo came out during finals, and the point was, December is an extremely profitable month. And a flat screen TV, by the way, that was what you could win.
Oh, gosh.
Uh, yeah, I
Like you
I
had
tend
time to watch TV, right?
well, I tend to think of myself as a fairly prolific writer in those days, and I will tell you that I did not win the TV. So you should be aware that my retirement from that business did not eliminate a major threat. There are many, many people out there like me, and probably some that were better and more efficient, and maybe not as socially inclined as I am. And so, if you were really a true hermit, it would be very easy to, maybe win that contest. You know,
Well, how many papers did you write each week?
I have this little assignment book here that I used to keep back in the day. It's falling apart from age now, but so every one of these lines was an assignment. Just going through it, it looked like I averaged about 12 papers a week or so.
And what lengths would they be?
Every length imaginable. I'm looking at 4 pages, 10 pages, 12 pages, 20 pages. Yeah, like just a random day here. The November 22nd, I had one three pager, one four pager, a six pager, and a five pager. You know, so which is a modest day to be honest.
Wow. Well, in the first book, there's a paragraph where you actually describe what it was like, and I'm wondering if you could just read a part of that.
Certainly.
What a typical day was.
Sure. Yeah, here I'm gonna travel back in time.
Okay.
This will take me back. I'm a paper factory, a sweatshop of one, a warehouse of industrial machinery humming over an endless assembly line where the stack of incoming parts never gets smaller. I'm self-employed, so I'm always on the clock. And I'll
And
drop down
then,
right here.
yeah, a little bit later, you actually talk about where you would do this. It
Hmm.
was all encompassing or all consuming, it seemed.
Oh yes. On a romantic getaway, I sneak in a last-minute assignment while the lady gets dressed for dinner. While I ride the bus, I type furiously while apologizing to those around me for my flying elbows. I write papers in crowded bars. I write papers in the midst of drunken debauchery, pausing between paragraphs to hit the blunt going around the room. Sometimes, during my Thursday night poker games, I write a few sentences every time I fold a hand.
Oh gosh. And then there was one where you said that you were writing before it was at a bachelor party. Like
Oh, yes, in Las Vegas. Yeah.
so
My friends were really accustomed to this, Like I said, just like the paper companies, I was very open about what I did, and everybody knew. Just to get back to the question you asked me previously, as you can see there was a lot of pressure, but it was never from outside. It was once you took an assignment on, you own the deadline. And because the only way to really make a living was to take on a ton, you would overburden yourself with deadlines, and it could be a pretty brutal and pressure-induced way to live. So there was constant pressure to hit deadlines, but it was fairly self-imposed.
well, was that level of, effort and time worth the money to you then?
Well, insofar as I don't know how else I would have made a living or fed myself or paid rent, I have to say yes, it was. It wasn't worth the money because it was good money. It was worth it because I needed to make a living, and to be honest, writing is my only marketable skill. So I really didn't have a whole lot of other options, you know. So it was yeah, in that respect, I wouldn't change it if I could.
Hmm. Well, did it become maybe a more onerous process as colleges began using anti-plagiarism sites such as Turnitin or other means of detecting cheating?
Actually, it's kind of the opposite. Turnitin, which does great work detecting, material that has been directly copied, plagiarized. Um, it's a very effective service, and it emerged around the same time that a lot of these bespoke essay mill companies emerged. And in a lot of ways, the bespoke essay writing was a response to what Turnitin could do, because for the first 10 years of the internet in the Wild West, cutting and pasting was a really easy way to get away with something. But Turnitin made that impossible. And in doing so, created this wider demand for bespoke essay services. That's probably not fair. Colleges create that demand, but because Turnitin pushed them out of this one market, they flooded to another, and
Mm.
that market really grew around that need.
What did you do to ensure that this says every paper is original? So how did you ensure that was the case and that you weren't, you know, plagiarizing? I mean, obviously you're not plagiarizing because that's directly copying somebody else's words, but making sure that this was a unique voice.
I mean, that was easy because that's the one thing I really loved doing was to just sit and write and do research and cite my research properly and, um, you know, it sounds funny, but it was an opportunity for me to learn and gain a level of enrichment that was simply not possible while I was in college. So, I'm inclined to say, the other reason I wouldn't trade that experience, no matter how illicit it was, and how unthinkable it would be for me to do something like that today. I learned so much that it is that nobody will play trivia with me, and I sharpened my writing skills in a way that I needed to. It was a great way to be sort of in the woodshed, learning how to work.
Did you ever hear back on what grades you earned?
No, not really. It's funny. I know I read an email where the customer requested, that they needed to have a certain grade. However, it was our official policy, that we didn't guarantee grades. As a matter of fact, to get back to the legal language, we made it very clear that these were study guides and that they were by no means meant to be submitted in a classroom. Uh, and so, if
Okay.
you did that, then the consequences were really on you. And if you told me you didn't like the grade you got, then you have violated the conditions of our agreement. So,
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, that's kind of like Chegg saying this is just to help you understand how to answer the question.
a hundred
Um,
percent, like that's exactly what it is.
right. So why did you stop?
Well, as I mentioned, my first ambition was to write for a living, and naturally, nobody wants to write for a living so that they can put somebody else's name on their work, or to be browbeaten by people who are borderline illiterate, which was also not an uncommon part of
Mm,
work. But uh, which is to say that I spent all of those years also ambitiously working to get out of this line of work, and for all of the years that I did it, I continued to look for work in areas that actually interested me, whether it was, politics or music, which is a big passion for me. And well, I found that even when I could get paying work doing those sorts of things, it was, you couldn't live on that. So, it was always a push, and only at the 10-year mark, which was probably 3 or 4 years past the point that I had burnt out on doing this and very much wished to be done doing it, did it occur to me that the best way out was to tell people more about it. That was, like as we led with, this was anytime anybody would ask what I did, I'd say, well, very frankly, I help students cheat for a living. And, people were just filled with questions about that.
yeah.
Well, and so it took me a while to connect the dots that, wow, everybody, people don't realize this goes on. It is very much out in the open. I was always very much out in the open. The companies are very readily Googleable. And so it was sort of news to me to find out that people in education specifically were just not aware. And so it wasn't so much that that was the moment that I decided to get out. That had happened long before. It was the day that I found the way out.
Mm. And found your way to what? I know you've written two books on your experiences, but what else do you want to be doing or are you doing?
So mostly I get the opportunity to write from the good side of higher education now. And so I have really spent the last 10 years offering as much advice and insight and candor as I can to everybody, A, who has to ask about cheating, and B, on every sort of root issue that I think is systemically wrong with higher education. Because to get deeper about it, my book really digs into this. There are so many structural things in higher education. Each of them could be its own 10 series podcast, but and at the root of all of them is the heart of cheating. So.
Mm. Well, Dave Tomar, thank you so much for drawing back the curtain on how essay mills continue to operate and thrive in an environment really where academic integrity is the coin of the realm. I'm Catherine Barron. You've been listening to The Score. The Score is produced by the Academic Integrity and Research Group at Pando Public Relations. It is underwritten by Measure Learning, and technical support is provided by This Is Distorted. To ask questions, to download show notes, or to learn more about The Score, visit our website at podcastthescore.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at podcastthescore, or find us on